Garrett Cole walked into Mountain Range Arms on a Saturday morning in July, looking exactly like what he was, a working man. Worn leather jacket, faded jeans, boots with the heels ground down from years of concrete floors and long shifts. He didn't check his reflection in the glass door on the way in. He didn't adjust his collar or straighten up for anyone. He walked to the display case, looked through the glass at the row of handguns lined up beneath the fluorescent lights, and pointed to one near the center. "I'd like to see the Glock 19, he said. Ashley was the first one to look up. She was 27, the senior floor associate, and she had a habit of reading people the way some people read weather: fast, confident, and often wrong. She looked at Garrett from the top of his head to the soles of his boots. She took in the jacket, the jeans, the quiet way he stood with his hands loose at his sides. Then she smiled, the particular smile of someone who has already decided the answer before hearing the question. "You know that one runs close to $800, right?" She said it politely. She said it the way you'd warn someone that a restaurant was out of their price range, helpful, almost kind, except for the edge underneath it that wasn't kind at all. Brooke was standing 2 feet to Ashley's right, and she leaned slightly toward Jade and said, "Just loud enough. Maybe we should point him toward Walmart." The two of them laughed. Not loud, not cruel in any theatrical way, just the small, dismissive laugh of people who had already placed this man in a category and found the category amusing. Garrett looked at them. Not through them, not past them, directly at them, with full attention, the way you look at something you are trying to understand rather than something you are trying to avoid. And then he smiled. It was not the smile of a man who was embarrassed. It was not the tight, controlled smile of someone swallowing anger. It was calm in a way that felt almost out of place in that room, the kind of calm that doesn't come from having nothing to worry about, but from having already survived the things worth worrying about. It was a smile that belonged to a man who had stood in rooms far more dangerous than this one, and had learned that the most important thing you can do in any room is stay exactly who you are. Ashley's own smile faded before she quite knew why. Something about his expression unsettled her in a way she couldn't name. She had expected embarrassment, or defensiveness, or the tight-jawed pride of a man who felt called out. She had not expected this easy, unhurried steadiness that made her feel, suddenly and uncomfortably, like she was the one being evaluated. Before anyone could say anything else, Garrett turned, found the chair in the far corner of the shop back against the wall, facing the entrance, and sat down. He folded his hands on his knees. He waited. If you believe that the quietest person in the room is often the one with the most to say, hit like right now. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from, share this with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to the channel. Because in 15 minutes, a woman is going to walk through that back door and bring this entire room to a stop. Ashley watched him sit down and felt the vague irritation of someone whose performance has failed to land. She exchanged a glance with Brooke. Brooke shrugged. The moment passed, or seemed to. Other customers drifted in. The morning moved forward, but Jade didn't move on quite as easily. She was the youngest of the three, 25, and she had a quieter way of taking in the world. She had laughed earlier, half a laugh, the reflexive kind, but watching Garrett walk to that corner chair and settle into it with such complete self-possession made her feel something she didn't quite have a word for. Not guilt exactly, something closer to curiosity or unease. She picked up a glass of water from behind the counter, walked across the floor without announcing herself, and set it on the small table beside his chair. Garrett looked up at her. She didn't say anything. She just turned and walked back to the counter. He watched her go. He didn't say thank you out loud, but he picked up the glass and drank. And for a moment he looked at the back of Jade's head with an expression that was, if anything, more attentive than before. 15 minutes passed. A new customer came in sport coat, dress watch, the kind of easy confidence that comes with knowing you belong everywhere you go. Ashley's posture changed within seconds. Her shoulders came back, her voice warmed. Brooke appeared from nowhere with a brochure. All three of them materialized around this man like sunflowers turning toward light, and Garrett watched the whole thing from his corner chair without saying a single word. Jade was the one who finally broke away. Ashley was deep into the sales pitch, and Jade used the opening to slip down to the far end of the counter, closest to where Garrett was sitting. She spoke quietly. "Which model were you looking at?" "The Glock 19, he said. "Generation 5. I want to look at the trigger pull on the MOS variant, compare the weight loaded versus unloaded. I've been running the numbers on barrel length versus effective range for home defense at close quarters." Jade went very still for a moment. He wasn't using the language of someone who had looked up a few things online before coming in. He was using the language of someone for whom firearms were not a novelty. He knew the terminology the way mechanics know engines, not because they studied it once, but because they lived with it. "You've used this platform before," she said. It wasn't quite a question. "A little," he said. She held his gaze for a second, then reached below the counter and pulled out the background check form. "Federal paperwork, standard issue. I'll need you to fill this out before we can show you anything from the case," she said. "Standard procedure." He nodded, took the form and pen, and began filling it out. She went to pull the Glock from the case. When she came back, the form was sitting on the counter, filled out in the clean, practiced handwriting of a man who had signed his name to many official documents in his life. She set the handgun on the felt mat and reached for the form, and then she stopped. She read the line under previous occupation. She read it again. Her eyes moved down the page to the emergency contact line, to the next of kin field, and she read those too. And something shifted in her face, not surprise exactly, but a heaviness, a recalibration. She looked up slowly, across the length of the store, to where Garrett had been sitting. He was in the same position. Back straight, hands on his knees, eyes on the front door. Jade folded the form carefully, set it on the counter, and said nothing. But she did not look at Garrett the same way again. The back door opened at 11:14 in the morning. Claire Hargrove came in from the stockroom the way she always did on Saturday mornings, moving fast, already thinking about the delivery discrepancy she'd found in the inventory, already composing the email she needed to send. She was 34 years old, and she carried herself like a woman who had built something real with her hands and her grief and her will, and who had learned that the only way to keep something standing was to keep moving. Her hair was the color of dark honey, pulled back simply. She wore a white button-down and tactical pants, and a small name badge on her chest that said Hargrove Owner, and she was, by any ordinary measure, exactly the kind of woman people tended to notice when she walked into a room. But she wasn't thinking about any of that. She was thinking about the inventory. She made it 3 steps past the door before she stopped. It wasn't a sound that stopped her. It wasn't anything anyone said. It was the sight of a man sitting in the corner chair, the back against the wall chair, the chair that every person who had spent time in a combat zone eventually gravitated toward without thinking about it, sitting with his hands on his knees and his eyes on the front entrance, in the posture of someone who had learned to stay ready not as a discipline but as a reflex. Claire Hargrove had grown up watching her father sit that way. She stood in the middle of the floor for several seconds. Around her, the shop moved normally. Ashley was still talking to the man in the sport coat. Brooke was restocking a shelf display. Jade was standing very still behind the counter. None of them saw what Claire was seeing. None of them were looking for it. She walked toward Garrett, not around the counter, not through the formal architecture of the transaction. She crossed the open floor directly, and she stopped in front of his chair. And she looked at him the way her father had taught her to look at the world, not at the surface of a thing, but into it. "Did you serve?" she asked. Her voice was quiet. Not the professional quiet of a business owner managing a situation. The quiet of someone asking a question whose answer actually matters. Garrett looked up at her. Something in her face, the directness of it, the absence of performance, made him answer without the usual hedge. 101st Airborne, he said. 8 years. Claire Hargrove closed her eyes. Just for a moment. Just long enough to do something private with what she had just heard. When she opened them again, there was something in her expression that couldn't be faked and couldn't be learned. The particular quality of someone who has loved a soldier and lost one and never fully stopped carrying the weight of that loss. She took one small step back. She drew herself upright, and she raised her right hand in a salute that was crisp and unhurried and entirely sincere. "Sir," she said, "it's an honor." The shop went quiet. Ashley's mouth opened. She didn't close it right away. The man in the sport coat looked over. Brooke turned from the shelf she was restocking and stood with a box of ammunition in each hand, not moving. Jade looked at Claire, then at Garrett, then down at the folded form on the counter, and the weight of what she had read there settled over her like a second understanding. Garrett looked at Claire for a long moment. He didn't stand. He didn't say anything right away. He just let the gesture land the way it was meant to, not as a performance, not as a transaction, but as something given freely by someone who understood exactly what she was giving and why. Then, quietly, he said, "Thank you." It was the most he had said in the last 45 minutes. It was also the most he had needed to say. Claire led him to the back office, not because the situation required it, but because she found she didn't want to have this conversation in the middle of the floor. She had things she wanted to say that belonged in a quieter space. The office was small and practical, a desk, 2 chairs, a filing cabinet, a corkboard covered in supplier contacts and compliance reminders, and on the desk, positioned so that it was the first thing you saw when you sat down, a framed photograph, 8 by 10. A man in dress uniform, standing before an American flag, smiling with the uncomplicated happiness of someone who believed entirely in what he was doing. He was handsome in the direct, unself-conscious way of men who never thought much about being handsome, and his eyes had a warmth in them that photographs don't usually capture, but this one had. Sergeant First Class David Hargrove. Killed in action, Kandahar Province, Afghanistan, 2012. Claire had been 21 years old. She didn't explain the photograph immediately. She just sat down across from Garrett and let him see it, and waited for whatever came next. "I want to apologize for what happened this morning," she said, "in my store, with my employees. That should not have happened." Garrett looked at the photograph, then at her. His expression was unhurried. "It wasn't your fault," he said. "The store is my responsibility," she said. "So it is." She told him briefly, without dramatizing it, about her father, about growing up in a house where service was not an abstraction but a daily reality, the discipline of it, the sacrifice of it, the love that ran underneath it like a current. Her father had taught her to shoot when she was 9 years old, not because he thought it was important for her to be armed, but because he thought it was important for her to understand that a tool was only as good or as dangerous as the person who held it, and that responsibility was not a concept you taught in the abstract. You taught it with your hands. You taught it by showing up. Her father had shown up every single day of her life in every way that mattered, and she had not fully understood until he was gone what an extraordinary thing that ordinary consistency had been. About the phone call she had received on a Tuesday morning in March when she was a junior in college, studying for a midterm on contract law that she never ended up taking. About the voice on the other end that had been careful and formal and apologetic in a way that told her everything before the words did. About the folded flag, presented to her at the graveside by a soldier who could not have been more than 22 years old and who held it with a gravity that she had never forgotten. About the months that followed, the particular, grinding silence of grief that doesn't make a sound because the person it misses never needed noise to fill a room. About deciding, eventually, that the only thing she could think to do with the grief and the insurance settlement and the small savings her father had left her was to build something in his name, a place where the people who had served the way he served would walk through the door and be treated the way he deserved to be treated, where no one would look at a man's jacket and decide the conversation was already over. "That's what this place is supposed to be," she said, That's what it's supposed to mean." She paused, looking at the photograph. And this morning it wasn't. Garrett was quiet for a moment. He looked at the photograph again, the way a person looks at a photograph when they recognize something in it. Not just see it. "He's proud of you," he said, plainly, without sentimentality, the way a man says something true. Claire looked at him. For a moment she didn't speak. It was not the first time someone had said something like that to her, but it was the first time in a long time that it had come from someone who said it without needing anything from her. No sympathy, no validation, no bridge back to their own story. He just said it because it was what he saw. "Tell me about your daughter," she said. He told her. Not everything, but the important things. She had her mother's eyes and her father's stubbornness, which Claire smiled at. Her mother, Diana, had died 22 months ago. Breast cancer, diagnosed late, fought hard. Garrett had left the army after his second extension because Diana's treatments had moved into the phase where she needed someone at home, and he had chosen without hesitation. He was working now as a welder at a fabrication shop outside Cedar Falls, second shift, which meant Sophie was alone in the house from 3:30 until after midnight. "I want something in a locked case in the house," he said. "She knows not to touch it, but I want to know it's there." He said it simply, without defensiveness, not asking for permission or approval, just explaining. Claire nodded. She understood the particular arithmetic of that decision, the math of love and risk, and the things you do when you are the only line of defense between your child and a world that doesn't ask permission. "Let's go get you what you came for," she said. She walked back out onto the floor with Garrett at her side, and the temperature of the room changed in the way that a room changes when the person who owns it returns with something settled in her eyes. Ashley and Brooke both saw her coming. Both straightened without being told. Claire stopped at the counter. She did not raise her voice. She spoke in the measured tone of someone who has learned that the most serious things do not require volume. "Ashley," she said, "can you explain to me why this customer has been sitting in that chair for the better part of an hour when we have the model he requested in stock and in the case?" Ashley opened her mouth. What came out was a version of the explanation she had been assembling in her head. Protocol, the background check, procedure. The words were technically accurate and entirely beside the point, and they both knew it. "Our procedures apply to every customer equally," Claire said. "They are not a tool we use to manage people we've decided don't belong here. They are not flexible based on what kind of jacket someone is wearing." She paused. "Is that understood?" "Yes," Ashley said. Her voice was smaller than usual. Claire turned to include Brooke in the statement without singling her out further, and then she did something that she had not planned to do when she walked back out onto the floor. She turned back to Ashley and said it not loudly, not performatively, but clearly and in front of everyone. "The man you laughed at this morning received the Army Commendation Medal for pulling 3 of his teammates out of a kill zone during an ambush in Afghanistan in 2013. That information was in the system, the veteran priority registration this store has maintained for 4 years. It was there to be seen by anyone who looked." Jade, at the end of the counter, was very still. She had looked, she had seen it. She had not said anything, and the knowledge of that sat in her chest with a specific, uncomfortable weight. Ashley said nothing. She looked at the counter. Then she looked at Garrett, who had come to stand quietly in the doorway of the back hallway, and who was watching Claire with an expression that was not quite surprise, but something adjacent to it, the look of a man encountering someone who operates by a code he recognizes. He said, "You don't have to do this." Claire looked at him steadily. "Yes, I do," she said. "Not for you. For what this place is supposed to be." The afternoon light was coming through the front windows, long and warm by the time Ashley found herself alone in the office with Claire. Brooke had been sent on a supply run. The floor was quiet. Jade was managing 2 walk-in customers at the far end of the display case, and Garrett was sitting in one of the 2 chairs in the main consultation area, paperwork on the table in front of him, a cup of coffee at his elbow that Claire had produced from the back without being asked. Ashley sat across from her employer and looked at the photograph on the desk. She had walked past it many times before without stopping to consider what it meant. Now she looked at it. He was 38 when he died, Claire said without preamble. Same age as the man you laughed at this morning, give or take. She wasn't being calculated about the comparison. She was just telling the truth. She told Ashley about the morning she got the call, how she had been in the library, studying for a midterm she never ended up taking, how the casualty officer had apologized for delivering the news over the phone, which meant it was already too late for the alternative, how she had driven 4 hours home in a state of such complete unreality that she could not account afterward for how she had managed the turns. He had the flag on the mantel, she said. He'd been given it at a ceremony 2 years before, and he kept it there because he said it reminded him what the job was for. Not the government, not the mission, the people, the ones at home who needed someone to hold the line so they could live their lives without having to think about what holding the line costs. Ashley was quiet. She was looking at the man in the photograph, really looking. The way you look at something when you finally stopped deciding what you think of it and started actually seeing it. Her father was still alive. He lived 40 minutes away in the same house she'd grown up in, and she called him on Sunday evenings and complained about her commute and her rent, and he listened with the patient, careful attention of a man who understood that his daughter's problems were real to her and that his job was to honor them. She had never once, in all of those Sunday phone calls, thought about what it would be like to receive a different call instead, the kind that starts with an apology. The man sitting out there right now, Claire continued, he came in here this morning to buy a handgun to put in a locked box in his house so his 8-year-old daughter would be safe while he works the late shift. That's it. That's the entire story. He lost his wife less than 2 years ago. He works second shift as a welder to keep the lights on. He drove here this morning to take care of his child in the only way he could think to do it. And the first thing you did when he walked in was make sure he knew you thought he couldn't afford it. Ashley looked at the desk. I didn't know, she said. That's exactly the point, Claire said. You didn't know. You didn't ask. You looked at his jacket and made a decision. My father came home from his second tour and went to 3 different stores before he found one where the person behind the counter treated him like a customer instead of something suspicious. He never forgot it. And when I opened this place, I made a promise to him and to myself that this store would never be one of those stores. Ashley stood at the door for a long moment after Claire finished talking. Then she turned back. Can I apologize to him directly? She asked. I don't know if he wants to hear it, Claire said honestly. But you should try. The paperwork took 20 minutes. Claire handled it herself, ran his information through the veteran priority channel that cut the standard wait time from 3 to 7 days down to same day, provided the purchase was otherwise clean, which his was. She pulled the Glock 19 from the case, walked him through the configuration options, set him up with the 2 accessories he asked about, both sensible, both practical, no upselling, and wrote up the receipt. Garrett was gathering the bag and the documentation when Ashley appeared. She came without Brooke, without anyone. She stood 2 feet from him with her hands at her sides, and she said it simply, I want to apologize for this morning. There's nothing I can say to explain it that makes it okay. I'm sorry. Garrett looked at her for a moment. He considered her the way he considered most things, without hurry, without performance. Thank you for saying that, he told her. It was not absolution. It was not the wiping clean of the morning. Claire walked him to the front. The July sun had climbed fully overhead, and the parking lot shimmered with the particular white heat of a Tennessee summer at midday. Garrett stopped on the step, one hand on the doorframe, and turned back toward her. The name on the sign, he said. Hargrove. That's him? That's him, she said. He nodded slowly, looking at the sign above the entrance as though he was reading something in it that hadn't been there a second ago. He would have liked this place, he said, and then, after a pause, he would have liked what you've made of it. Claire stood in the doorway and watched him cross the parking lot. She didn't say anything else. There was nothing left to say, and she had learned, somewhere in the years since her father died, that some moments are completed by silence. He reached his truck, an older F-150, dark blue, the kind of truck that gets used rather than displayed, and didn't look back before getting in. She watched the truck back out of its space. She watched it reach the parking lot, exit, and pause for a second at the road. Then she went inside. Garrett sat in the truck for a moment before starting it. He rested his hands on the wheel and looked through the windshield at the middle distance, the way you look at nothing when you're actually looking at something internal. The box from the gun shop was on the passenger seat. The paperwork was folded in the bag beside it. He thought about Diana. Not the end of it, not the hospital, not the quiet Tuesday in October when she had simply stopped, but the earlier version, the one he kept on purpose. Diana at the kitchen table with her coffee and her crossword puzzle, Sunday morning, bare feet. Diana at Sophie's first school play, making eye contact with him across the auditorium in that private way couples develop over years of shared attention to a shared thing they love. Diana on the back porch in the evenings, the summer before the diagnosis, talking about things that seemed ordinary then and enormous now, about whether they should get a dog, about whether Sophie would take to music or to sports, about what they wanted the next 10 years to look like. They had been so specific. They had made so many plans. And then the plans had simply ended, the way things end without announcing themselves, and he had been left alone in the house with a 7-year-old and a set of blueprints for a life that no longer had its architect. Diana saying, 2 weeks before she died, with the particular clarity that sometimes comes at the end, "You're going to be okay. Both of you. I need you to know that." He had not entirely believed it. But he had held it, the way you hold a thing that might be true. He thought about the woman who had walked through the back door of that shop at 11:14 in the morning, and the look on her face when he had said the name of his unit, and the salute she had given him, not as a gesture, not as a customer service moment, but as the act of a woman who had learned the meaning of that gesture at the greatest possible cost, and chose to give it anyway. He thought about what she had said in the office, about her father, about what the store was for. He thought about the way she had looked at Sophie's drawing, not quickly, not politely, but with the full weight of her attention. There was something in Claire Hargrove that he recognized the way you recognize a key that fits the same lock as yours. Not identical, not interchangeable, but shaped by the same kind of door. He picked up his phone and called Sophie's cell. She answered on the second ring, which meant she was somewhere comfortable, probably on the couch, probably watching something she wasn't supposed to be watching before lunch. "Hey, Bug," he said. "Dad." A pause, the particular energetic pause of an 8-year-old recalibrating toward conversation. "Did you get it?" "I got it. Did you get ice cream too?" He laughed. It was the first time he had laughed all morning, and it came out easy and real, the way laughter does when it isn't performed. "I didn't get ice cream," he said, "but we can fix that. I'm on my way." "Okay." Another pause. "Dad?" "Yeah, you sound different." He thought about that. Good different or bad different? A long, considering silence. Sophie's silences were always longer than you expected. She had gotten that from Diana. Good different, she decided. "I'll be home in 20 minutes, he said. He started the truck. As he pulled out of the parking lot, he checked the rearview mirror, a habit, automatic. The legacy of years of training that had long since become instinct. In the mirror, behind the truck, he saw the front of Mountain Range Arms receding in the distance, and in the doorway, just visible, Claire Hargrove, standing with her arms crossed, watching his truck reach the road. She turned back inside before he pulled into traffic. He drove home. But the image of her standing there stayed with him for the rest of the day and into the evening, and was still there in some quiet corner of his mind when he turned off the light in Sophie's room that night and stood for a moment in the dark hallway, listening to his daughter breathe. 3 weeks later, Garrett Cole pulled into the Mountain Range Arms parking lot on a Saturday morning. Same truck, same jacket, same boots. But he was not alone. Sophie climbed out of the passenger side in the enthusiastic, slightly disorganized way of 8-year-olds exiting vehicles, and she had a piece of paper in her hand that she had been protecting during the entire drive, with a seriousness she typically reserved for very important things. She had been working on it since Thursday, and she had told Garrett that it was for the lady at the gun shop, and when he had asked how she knew about the lady at the gun shop, Sophie had looked at him in the long-suffering way she had inherited entirely from her mother and said that he talked about it more than he thought he did. He had not argued the point. Claire was behind the front counter when they came in. She looked up at the sound of the door, and her face did the thing faces do when the person arriving is someone unexpected but welcome, a brief brightening, quickly composed. She looked at Sophie, then at Garrett. Sophie crossed the floor with the directness of a child who has decided something and gone ahead with it. She held out the piece of paper with both hands. "I drew your store," she said. "Dad told me about it." Claire took the paper carefully and looked at it. It was drawn in the ambitious mixed-media style of third-graders everywhere, crayon and marker, some pencil, a level of perspective that prioritized feeling over geometry. There was a building, rendered in brown with a sign on top. There was a man in a brown jacket standing in front of it. And there was a woman with yellow-orange hair standing next to him, close enough that their shoulders were almost touching. They were both smiling. Claire looked at the drawing for a long moment. She did not say anything immediately, and Garrett recognized the quality of the silence. It was the same silence he had occupied in his truck 3 weeks ago, the silence of someone letting something settle into a place that matters. "This is beautiful," Claire said finally. "I used the good markers," Sophie told her, with the earnest pride of someone explaining their process. "The ones I'm not supposed to use for homework." Claire smiled at that, a real smile, the unguarded kind. "I'm going to put this on my wall," she said. In the office, Ashley had come out from the back at the sound of the door, and she stood now at the end of the counter watching Sophie with an expression that was different from any expression she had worn 3 weeks ago. Quieter, more considered. She came around the counter and crouched down to Sophie's level. "This is really good," she said, nodding at the drawing. "You're a good artist." Sophie looked at her appraisingly. "Thank you," she said. "My dad says if you're going to do something, you should do it right." Ashley looked up at Garrett. He met her eyes and gave a small, unhurried nod. Not forgiveness, fully. Not the erasure of the morning. But something like the acknowledgement of movement, the recognition that a person had looked at themselves and decided to be different, and that the decision deserved to be seen. Ashley nodded back. Then she straightened and went back to work, and somewhere in the distance between where she had been 3 weeks ago and where she stood now, a door had opened, and she had chosen to walk through it. Garrett turned to find Claire beside him. "She wanted to take the safety course," he said. "I looked it up on your website. The junior program. For kids whose parents—" He paused. "For kids in single-parent households. It runs on Saturday mornings," Claire said. "First session starts in about 20 minutes. "Good timing," he said. "Very good timing," she agreed. She took Sophie to the classroom in the back, a real room, set up with small chairs and a table and the kind of careful, patient infrastructure of someone who had thought hard about what children need to feel safe while learning something serious. Sophie went without hesitation, because she was her father's daughter, and hesitation was not in her nature. Garrett stood in the doorway and watched her find a seat in the front row. Then he stepped back into the main floor and stood the way he always stood, jacket, jeans, boots, hands loose at his sides, and waited, behind the counter, restocking the display of cleaning supplies. Jade glanced over at him and gave a small nod that carried more in it than the gesture itself. He returned it. The morning light was coming in clean and level through the front windows when Claire came back out of the classroom, closing the door quietly behind her. She stopped next to Garrett in the doorway. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "She's going to be good at this," Claire said. She's good at everything she decides to be good at, Garrett said. Claire nodded. She was quiet for a moment. Then, the session runs for an hour. There's coffee in the back office. If you want to, she stopped. Started differently. You're welcome to wait here. He looked at her. I was planning to. A beat. The course runs every Saturday, Claire said. So if she wants to come back next week, she'll want to come back, Garrett said. Claire turned slightly toward him. Just her? He held her gaze, and this time, the smile that came to his face was not the enigmatic, unreadable calm of a man who had learned to give nothing away. It was simple and certain and entirely present, the smile of a man who has survived enough to know the difference between what is worth holding and what is worth letting yourself reach for. No, he said quietly. Not just her. Some mornings change more than they appear to. They begin as one thing, a transaction, a routine, an ordinary Saturday in an ordinary town, and end as something else entirely. They don't announce themselves. They don't arrive with any particular sign that this will be the morning you remember. They just happen. The way all important things happen. One moment at a time. In the small and ordinary space between who you were and who you are becoming. A man walks into a store. 3 women decide, in the first 5 seconds, who he is. And then, a door opens from the back, and someone who knows how to look at the world with the eyes of someone who has lost something irreplaceable looks at that man and sees him, not his jacket, not his silence, not the particular worn quality of a person who has been carrying more than their share for longer than anyone around them knows. She sees him, and in being seen, something that had been closed for a long time opens a crack and lets in a little light. It doesn't fix everything. It doesn't bring back what was lost, but it changes the shape of the morning. And the shape of the morning changes the shape of the weeks that follow. And the weeks become something that looks, from a certain angle, like a beginning. And sometimes, all it takes to close that distance is one person who knows how to look at another person and see them, the real them. The one that was there all along, waiting quietly in the corner chair with their back against the wall and their eyes on the door, patient as stone, steady as something that has already been through the fire and come out the other side.